Welcome to the Responsible Marketing Podcast, conversations about marketing, sustainability and how we can all help in becoming more responsible organisations. I'm Jo, a marketing strategist and consultant, also flying the flag for a more sustainable and kind future for all. Joining me today is Tamma Carel, founder of Imvelo Ltd and co-founder of ICOR, businesses created to help organisations ensure they're compliant with legislation and become more educated and becoming more responsible. Tamma had a fascinating upbringing which, unbeknownst to her at the time, gave the foundations of where she finds herself now in her career. I've wanted Tamma to guest for some time, so was absolutely delighted when she agreed, and I know many of you will find our chat incredibly interesting. Tamma and I discussed legislation, who is truly responsible, the ethos of nurturing nature and the alternative mermaid, sustainability basics, consequences and benefits, habit stacking and net zero claims, and the next work generation in and around STEM industries. Tamma also gives us some tips and advice around frameworks and processes to help discover current levels of compliance and good business practices that might already be captured in your organisation. Tamma also has a brilliant weekly email called 5 Favourites Friday, where she picks out 5 favourite responsibility-led posts across social media, which keeps you up to date with the news without having to search yourself. And you can sign up by going to her website, links in the show notes. Let's dive straight in. Hi and welcome to the podcast. I'm delighted to have Tamma with me this afternoon. How are you doing, Tamma?
I'm very well, thanks. And yourself, Jo?
Very good, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on this afternoon. Before we start, you've got your fingers in, I shouldn't say fingers maybe, you're involved in a few little pies, all very exciting and kind of related. So would you like to just introduce yourself to our watchers and listeners and tell us what you get involved in?
Absolutely. So I work as an environmental consultant, have done for over 15 years now. And I run 2 small businesses based in the northeast of Newcastle. Imvelo Ltd is an environmental consultancy and training. So we specialise in working with larger organisations to improve their sustainability performance and strategies. And then my second business, ICOR Systems, is an online software solution that allows businesses to audit themselves against environmental and health and safety legislation.
Perfect.
So into the tech sphere, which is new for us.
Yeah, very exciting.
Absolutely.
And you had quite a lot. So we talked maybe, I don't know, was it a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, and you were just really kind of like developing software and things like that. That must have been a bit of an eye-opener.
It's been a very steep learning curve. Okay. So kind of ICOR's, lifespan came from the consultancy, that I do and have done for a number of years. When we're working with organizations to improve their kind of sustainability strategy, a big element of that is, well, where are you now versus where you want to be? Yeah. And part of that assessment as to where they are now is looking at the regulatory framework in which they operate. But that's always been a really difficult task for businesses. So it was kind of knowing that and seeing that problem over and over again that planted the seed that I thought that there was a way this could be easier for businesses, and kind of what would easier look like if we had a golden wish and could make something. And it was a crazy idea I shared in the office. I was like, I think there's something we can do here. And my business partner was like, well, draw me a picture and show me what you think it should look like, which resulted in the craziest mind map I've ever seen in my life. It was like, welcome to my brain. Here it is.
I'm not sure everyone wants to need to know that.
No.
Like opening your head and seeing what's inside.
But he was like, okay, cool, we can do this.
So it makes sense, obviously. And had he seen it from his side of the business as well?
So it's really interesting. My business partner and I have known each other for a number of years and collaborated on various projects, but I always ran my business Imvelo and he always ran his business, Pixel House Media. Yeah. And he, to all extents and purposes, is a designer and a developer, but loves sustainability projects. Okay. So we've always had that in common. And then, just by being in the same space, things I talk about with my work and things he talks about with his work, we've always kind of understood the mutual challenges. Yeah. But I feel incredibly blessed, actually, that when I did, open up my brain a little bit and let someone in, he didn't run in the opposite direction. It was more this like, no, I can see where you're trying to go. Yeah. What he is excellent at is making sense of the craziness, though. And honestly, from idea to where we are now would not have happened without him.
Quite something, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Especially when you've got so many legislation and compliance changes all the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's hard. I know that you're well on top of all of this, and it's incredible the amount of information you share as well. But even just keeping on top of that as a business, you know, some businesses I would imagine don't even know where to start with that. Never mind getting updates and making sure it's compliance at the latest feed. Do you know what I mean?
Well, we've expanded our team as well to kind of keep on top of that task. Again, it was something I had to do to be able to do my job as a consultant. It then became a service that businesses started to ask for, like, we just don't even know where to begin. But even in doing that, it was kind of, you know, this belief, I think, that, you know, ultimately the legislation is their responsibility, and there has to be a way of giving them ownership and control over that. Like, it's great to have a consultant help you and guide you, but it is your job to manage it. And that was the gap that we tried to fill, you know, from advice to actually the person whose job it is being like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing.
Exactly. Having the knowledge, and some reference points and things like that.
Absolutely.
Definitely. But let's go back, because obviously you grew up in South Africa.
I did.
And you clearly had, I mean, I know your backstory because I've heard it a couple of times at events and things, and it's fascinating. But you obviously had some sort of interest in either the environment, sustainability, responsibility, whatever that was, from day dot, right?
Absolutely.
So just like explain a little bit about that, because it's so fascinating.
I think, I mean, I feel very privileged for the upbringing that I had. And I will caveat that with realizing that I didn't know I was living in a developing country until I moved out of South Africa. So a lot of things that I took as standard in my upbringing, I've come to realize that actually this is the discrepancy in sustainability and some of the problems that we need to solve. I'm very fortunate. I come from a family of environmentalists, you know, conservationists, game rangers, long line of fishing in the family. And what I remember from my great grandparents is that our survival as a family and as humans is dependent on us nurturing nature. So if we don't look after the oceans, then there's no fish for us to catch, and then we can't make a life and livelihood after it. If we don't look after the animals that are in, you know, the bush and in the wild, then that will have consequences for the human settlements that exist around it. And it was things like, you know, consistent droughts, you know, like I grew up on 2-minute showers. Like, that to me is a normal thing, because there's just not enough water to go around. And when there's not enough water to go around, then everybody has to make sacrifices. It's understanding that our food comes from nature. We need rain and water and sustainable soil to grow crops, and that requires nurturing. You need ecosystem diversity. And all of those kind of elements. So I think I just inherently knew through all of the, you know, stories from my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, but also something about Africa and like how Africa understands our existence is dependent on nurturing the environment, and that actually the lines between us are really, really close.
And I think we forget as humans quite often that we're just part of an ecosystem. You know, we do have, well, we have the human ego, which kind of like seems to put us as kings of everything, and yet actually, you know, without us, the world would probably thrive.
I mean, I so distinctly remember as a child, like being in a game reserve, and we were camping. You know, there was no electricity, there was no running water. Like, we were wild, we were with nature, and that's kind of how you holiday in Africa. You get away from the busyness and into the rawness of it. But I remember kind of standing and looking around and being like, if I were attacked by a lion, like, I've got nothing to actually help me. I've got no teeth, I've got no claws, I can't run very fast, I can't climb, I can't fly, I can't swim, I've got no fur, like, and I was like, why are we at the top of the food chain?
It's so weird.
Because actually, in nature, we're a little bit useless.
Absolutely right. And so, going back to that child, kind of like that young girl in South Africa now, what do you think she'd be most either surprised of where you are now, or proud of? What kind of things do you think she'd be?
Well, my childhood aspiration was to be a mermaid, and I have a deep love and respect for the ocean, and I think that is kind of the fishing in my family, and you know, how how basically the ocean can give you everything that you need, like nothing else as long as you look after it. I know that going through school, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I, wasn't able to get into university to study that because I wasn't very good at chemistry. And kind of thinking, well, that's it. I've lost the opportunity and I'm never really going to get to do the work that I want to do. I think what a young me would be proud of was kind of taking the uncommon path. I can't say that I ever had aspirations to be an entrepreneur, to set up my own business, tech, where did that come from? That was a bit of a surprise. So I think it's that none of this was actually planned, but I've stayed open-minded. I've stayed true to the cause of, as long as it progresses sustainability, then that is work that I want to do. But kind of expanded my horizon a little bit. And weirdly, it all comes back because now I do offshore projects and I'm doing marine work and I get to be in the ocean. And I never really thought that would happen.
So a good squiggly career so far.
Usually the best.
Well, I know. I absolutely agree with that. So let's talk about sustainability then. Obviously, like you say, your kind of background's environmentalist, but you obviously sustainability has to be like a massive part of that. It's a bit of a buzzword and it gets thrown about left, right and centre. A lot of people think it's expensive. A lot of people think it's not necessarily real or necessary. How do you actually define it? When you go to a client or a client comes to you, how do you explain to them what sustainability is from your point of view?
I do like kind of an academic concept, the traditional Brundtland perspective of sustainability being a triple bottom line that needs to consider people, planet, and profit. And I think we tend to fall in, and I'm quite environmentally biased. Like, I think we need a strong environment to build strong communities. And from strong communities, you get robust organizations and institutions. And that is kind of what sustainability looks like. I think it's about expanding that to say, the route towards sustainability is triple bottom line. And every decision we make as a business should consider the consequences and benefits to each of those pillars. What does it mean for the environment? What does it mean for our people? And what does it mean for our business? One of my bugbears is how we use the word sustainability as a thing that we're doing. So I believe really strongly that sustainability is the destination. Like, we are not sustainable. That's a fact. We are trying to become sustainable. So when we are doing sustainability, that doesn't really make sense. Like, sustainability is the destination, and what we're doing is sustainable development to reach that destination. When you look at what sustainable development actually means, it's a fundamental principle of resource efficiency. We want to be more efficient with natural resources. We want to be more efficient with our people resources. We want to be more efficient with our financial resources. And from a business perspective, how can that not make sense?
Agreed. But then a lot of businesses but business managers, I should say, or leaders, the leadership side of that, the manager side of that, think it's still expensive. It doesn't have to be. And I think from my point of view, and I know that you start probably where I would start, although with slightly different facets of the same kind of like light bulb, if you like. But for me, it's about kind of looking internally at the business first and what doesn't cost. It doesn't have to be expensive. So do you face that? Do people still think doing sustainability or becoming more efficient has to be costly?
I mean, I think being more efficient is to stop doing things that are inefficient. It's an elimination process first. Like, why do we have 47 steps in this process? Why are we printing off every invoice and putting it in a filing cabinet? Why are we leaving the big frilly fancy lights on 24/7 when actually nobody is here between midnight and 6 a.m.? So, it's what we call the low-hanging fruit. But quite often in that elimination of unnecessary resource, you will see a financial saving. I think where we are beginning to face challenges is more like around the complexity of the world. So some of the environmental issues we have are quite complicated, and elimination is not going to solve the problem. Like, we can't stop using electricity.
Yeah.
You know, that is a critical part of all of our lives. Although, again, my African upbringing taught me you don't really need electricity that much, because, you know, load shedding happens every day for 2 to 8 hours. So you learn to survive and adapt. Apparently that's not normal.
Yeah, well,
but,
yeah. Maybe
you know,
for those people like yourself who've had that upbringing and realised that actually that can happen.
Yeah. And that's it. You know, when we
who
talk.
lives in a town, for example, like,
Exactly,
you know,
that.
Everyone goes crazy even when you have a power cut.
And it's really interesting. So that to me is like, when we talk about energy security, like, that is the situation to evolve. When load shedding happens in South Africa, that is, you know, there's just not enough to go around. And again, we know that there is just not enough to go around. So the energy provider picks a corner of the country and turns off the energy so that it can be more evenly distributed. But that means in that patch, that is every house, every school, every doctor's surgery, every care home, every hospital, you know, every business just doesn't have energy. So sustainability is, how do we keep doing what we need to do when a critical resource is no longer available to us?
And is that just for a few hours, or will that be for maybe a day or 2 days?
Depends.
Oh, okay. Any warning?
You get a text usually on the morning.
Okay.
That says.
So, like, for a hospital, that's really critical, though. So, have you found then, to kind of like offset that possibility, it's not even whether it's inevitable or not, it's the possibility of it, that they have had to start using, I don't know, like solar power, whatever else. So, okay.
So the answer to that is self-sufficiency. If you can't rely on the grid, how do you generate your own energy to make sure that you can continue to do what you want to do? And that is kind of those circularity principles. It's actually, how do we provide for ourselves and look around our local community and find those partnerships and networks that will make sure everybody can keep functioning. And what does blow my mind, you know, I'm not denying the privilege that I had growing up in South Africa, but when the lights go off, doesn't matter how nice your house is, you know, you're still in the dark.
That's very true. You can't see the cushions in the dark.
No. So it's that. It's like, actually, privilege does help. You know, you're a little bit more comfortable in that situation, but nature is bigger and stronger. So it's how we respect that and then kind of ensure our own survivability. I think for a lot of the technological innovations, you know, to become self-sufficient, that's more recent. So like, we're only just, you know, solar panels are more commonplace. But if you think about solar panels 15 years ago, it was new technology, it was prohibitively expensive.
Exactly,
and
hard to come by. You could even
source hard to
them.
come by, absolutely. So what you need is kind of market saturation, and then everything becomes more viable. A lot of the solutions are still in that development stage, which is frustrating, because it's not like we didn't know about this problem for quite a long time.
Yes, well,
we're just a little bit slow.
Well, there's been discussion since, I think, the 60s, 70s.
Yeah, about then.
And I still always find it fascinating that we're still almost having the same, if not slightly backward, conversations that we've already had. So therefore, I guess from a necessity point of view, has South Africa ahead of the UK, I guess, on that kind of thing, are they?
In some ways, and
which you would not expect, given it's still technically a developing country. So that's,
I mean, the grid is unlikely to ever meet the demand of the country, and the amount of investment that would now be necessary to, you know, and same challenge as we have: growing population, improved lifestyles, you know, people wanting more from life justifiably, but it just doesn't exist to meet all of those needs. So yes, a lot of South Africans are looking at, you know, individual or collective communities where energy is generated and shared, water is generated and shared. Waste management is definitely much more of a challenge out there. But it gives rise to a lot of like entrepreneurial thinking, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, I had a guy, not the South Africa based, but there's a guy who was the first episode of this season of podcast called Matt Penites, and he works for, he runs, he's one of the founders of a not-for-profit called Long Way Home, and they build houses and community centres and education centres out of rubbish in Guatemala, mainly Guatemala, but Venezuela, and I think they have actually been to South Africa as well and done some work there. And it's fascinating. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah. So that helps obviously both sides. Then waste management also,
Absolutely.
Community buildings, and help supporting those developing communities. So yeah. So back to your ICOR side, the compliancy type side, because sustainability can be quite a tick box exercise as well. So do you think businesses are putting themselves at risk thinking it's just tick box? I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to ask the question anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of elements to that. So kind of from the compliance side, the reason we focus on environmental and health and safety legislation is actually the UK has one of the best systems in the world. And I say that with the slight caveat that it's not perfect. There's actually not a single system on this planet is perfect. It's all just people trying to figure out a more coherent and standardized way of doing things. But in terms of the the levels of protection, the UK is leading the way. Okay. From a sustainability perspective, I always say compliance is the bare minimum. For any organization, fundamentally, you should not be breaking the law. Yeah. And the laws exist to protect the environment and to protect people and health and safety. So, that kind of argument like laws just red tape. Well, if our activities didn't cause harm to the environment and health and safety, then we wouldn't need this legislation. So it exists because our activities do. And to be a responsible business, at a bare minimum, you have to be a legally compliant business. And even if you're not a responsible business, you still have to not break the law. Is how that works. So our perspective is always, at least if businesses are compliant, they are offering a level of environmental and health and safety protection. And then it's from that bare minimum that you then go above regulation. What can we do better towards sustainability? Because it's not enough on its own. That true journey of sustainable development is going to require us to go above and beyond. And that above and beyond then looks at the principles of, resource efficiency, minimizing waste and pollution, and ultimately enhancing nature and restoring nature, because everything that we need, nature provides. Clean air, clean water, safe food, and shelter is ultimately what we're seeking to protect. And I think businesses that don't recognize that, again, if the lights go off, you can't be the business. You can't do what you need to do. If you need timber to make your products and you fail to protect forests, you're not going to have timber to make your product. So how does this make sense from a business risk and resilience perspective?
And do you think it's because, let's take timber, for example, because, it's assumed there's an inexhaustible supply of trees, which, in theory there could be, but there probably isn't. So, how do you then kind of, I don't want to say convince, it's a really bad, how do you educate businesses to then think, actually, maybe it's not timber we need, maybe it's a man-made material or something like that. Where do they start with something like that? Because that sounds like, from a business operational point of view, it sounds like an expensive and difficult, challenging, bogged down every day doing it kind of thing to address. So how do you educate people to understand that maybe it doesn't have to be that way? It could be embracing and exciting, and invigorating.
Absolutely.
Really.
I think that conversation around risk and resilience is really critical in terms of helping to inform some maybe more difficult, maybe more expensive conversations. I think it's always a conversation between now and in the future, and that is kind of the hard part. It's painting a future picture, like in 5 years' time, could you still operate like this if all the craziness in the world continues to carry on? What does 10 years from now look like? And as humans, it's really hard for us to really imagine what that future scenario looks like. But I think it's, making it more strategic. What do you want your operating profit to be in 5 years' time? And does your current model of paying the price hikes or depending on supply or fighting about quality, is that going to help you get to where you want to be? or would an upfront investment in an alternative way maybe hit a little bit hard now, but pay off in the future?
Yeah, and I guess that's where collaborative work comes in the industries as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so getting your supply chain involved and having those discussions about developments, because it might be you have a timber supplier that's quite happy to then, you know, branch out into more man-made fibers or materials or whatever anyway. So what if a client contacts you and says, okay, I need to get sustainable, I need to do some stuff, but I don't know where to start. Where do you start with them? Obviously you've talked a little bit about kind of like, let's see where you are now.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, from a marketing point of view, is exactly where I would start as well. Yeah. So what happens then? Do you go into the business, or do you work with them for a long period of time, or what happens to the process
it's
then?
really difficult for me to say what that journey will look like until that, you know, we have to go in and figure out how things are. Yeah. So there's two kind of processes to that. I always do a legal compliance audit using ICOR that says, because of your activities and operations, these are the parts of the environment that are regulated directly as a result of your performance. So if we do that audit and we know we've got lots of waste legislation, lots of water legislation, and maybe lots of carbon legislation, then already I know carbon, water, and waste are going to be areas of improvement for the sustainability strategy. And then the other thing I do is I use international frameworks to kind of test how they operate as a business. So using frameworks like ISO 14001 or B Corp or EcoVadis. That's not to say that they have to go for accreditation, but that's if we measure you against international frameworks for how to do environmental management, then we can give you an idea of what your processes should look like. And obviously what normally comes out of that is a whole lot of good practice that nobody in the business had ever shared with anybody else. So suddenly you go through it and you go, okay, well, you know, ISO 14001 says you have to communicate about your environmental performance to both your internal and external stakeholders. So how do you do that? And person A will go, well, we don't. And then you'll talk to the marketing team and they go, actually, we do all of this. And then you'll talk to the managing director and they're like, well, actually, I complete this report every year and send it to our group. And then you talk to finance and they're like, well, actually, we have a legal compliance requirement to include our carbon footprint in our financial accounts. And it's, you know, oh, look at all of these connected dots. Let's bring them together. And I'm a big believer, you know, in that sustainability strategy to not reinvent the wheel. So if they're doing good stuff, let them keep doing good stuff. But more importantly, to integrate with things they're already doing. Because if we make this hard, if we start introducing whole new processes and whole new workflows and whole new management systems, that's a barrier to adoption. Whereas it is much easier to say, well, you already have this meeting once a month, so I'd like you to add environment as an agenda item.
Absolutely.
And talk about these things. Exactly that.
And keep it on there.
So how do you reduce the barriers? And then it's habit stacking is what it is.
Oh, I like that. Habit stacking. I've never heard that expression before.
Oh, it's when you have to do things that you don't really want to do.
I like that. There's plenty in my life. You mentioned the marketing side, which obviously is the kind of like where I would be involved in. Do you find that, so when I talk to businesses, there's quite a few barriers, partly about the fear of greenwashing, for example, although I do say greenwashing is equally as bad. You know, let's talk about and be proud about what we do that's good. Do you find that there are barriers that people don't want to talk about what they're doing because of that fear of being called out?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it is double pronged. So I always say to my clients, like, what people want is the truth. You know? Absolutely. And it really is as simple as that. And again, think about yourself as a consumer. How do you feel about the brands when you feel they told you one thing, sold you a lie, and then you learn something else? How do we feel about people when they say, actually, I messed up and I'm really sorry about that, but what I've learned from it is X, Y, Z, and this is what I'm going to do differently. Then we tend to respect that person and understand, and we can see this is where it was, this is where it's going to be, and you've got something that you can measure in between that. The big thing with greenwashing is that you have to tell the truth. So you can't just put a gloss on it and say, And probably the best example of that is like net zero. We are net zero because we planted 45,000 trees. By all means, plant the trees. Go wild and plant the trees, but you cannot plant the trees and then make the claim about net zero, because that claim is not true. There is science and methodology and international standards that tell you what net zero looks like and what it doesn't look like. So unless you're following that framework, you can't tell the truth. So it's that credibility and the validity behind the claims that you're making. Similarly, if you do a carbon footprint and you only measure, your travel and your energy and your water, for example, well, that's not a carbon footprint. Again, there's an international methodology that says these are all the things you have to measure to have a credible framework.
So when you're saying, because there are obviously some platforms available on the internet that you can use to start that kind of journey and kind of give you a line in the sand, a very basic one, admittedly. So that would be based on number of employees, like transport, but that just actually covers some scope 3 stuff as well, so more supply chain, everything else. Is that what you're alluding to? So don't just count like your water, your energy, your travel, but look at the scope 3. So try and get as much information as possible. But maybe those carbon calculators, they call them, don't they, on the internet, could be a good start, but it might not give you the whole picture.
Absolutely. And again, it might just be a different way of communicating it. We have calculated our scope 1 and scope 2 carbon emissions. That's the truth. That's not your whole carbon footprint.
Yes, exactly right.
But you have done your scope 1 and your scope 2. So, it's just that.
It's just starting steps, right? So, because I think, again, for a lot of businesses, they're a bit like, I have no idea. And also, I'm finding it surprising that not many businesses that I've heard of are being asked by their value chain, so their up chain, for that information. So if they're a small, I do have one client that's a relatively small supplier, but they contribute a lot to their client business. And they've been asked for 3 years running now, which is good. They haven't changed an awful lot because they were super efficient as it started anyway, which is great. But I have said to them, but you need to look at various other bits like social value, for example, that kind of side as well. So it's not just about carbon.
No, that's that triple bottom line. People kind of
exactly,
profit.
Right? So it is, but exactly, I think we do spend a lot of time just talking about carbon emissions. So net zero.
And the environment is so much more than carbon, which is also a bugbear of mine.
How do you get around that then? Because I think when you say environment, everyone thinks, carbon. Well, we're great. We don't like emit any carbon. So I'm like, everyone does. So
absolutely,
we just sat here. We're doing.
You're alive. You have a carbon footprint.
Exactly.
I think I spend a lot of time, obviously, as a consultant, kind of educating through that consultancy journey. I think it's important. Normally, I start by defining all of the environmental challenges we are facing. One challenge is climate change, and your carbon footprint is the best way you will contribute towards reducing your impact on climate change. Then we have waste and pollution. So that needs a different metric, a different KPI. Then we have resource efficiency and natural materials. So how would we measure that? It could be all of those are calculable as carbon emissions. And what carbon emissions definitely did was give us a standardized metric that we had never had before. And that was always a problem with measuring the environment. And then there's biodiversity and ecosystems, which is a whole different kind of, way of measuring. And again, we're only really seeing the science come in now to try and standardize that. But wholeheartedly, I believe contributions towards restoring ecosystems, even if not measurable at the moment, are the best things that any of us can be doing towards sustainability, which is why plant as many trees as you can, do as much as you can to restore the environment. You just might not be able to say it's solving the problem for you. And that's the greenwash. But you can say you're doing it. It's still great stuff.
But equally, I think also don't plant the trees and then be, I don't know, polluting the oceans.
Yes, exactly that. And that's that double.
And I think, maybe, and I don't think necessarily small businesses fall into that trap necessarily, apart from maybe through naivety. But bigger businesses, I think, use, or have done, use that kind of blanket of, well, we contribute to charities, or we volunteer days, we plant trees, we do this, we do that, we're, entwined with, I don't know, whoever the Mermaid Society,
Yes.
whatever it might be. Equally, by the way, we're also, I don't know,
chugging out tons of pollution, chemicals, or
our
extracting.
supply chain is just like through the floor.
Absolutely.
And that's still
it's still a huge issue. What I feel it's slightly encouraged by is, you know, the general population are becoming more aware of this and being like, actually, we won't have the wool pulled over our eyes. We can see that doing that doesn't negate that particular activity. And with the rise of social media, you know, when businesses consider their critical stakeholders, your stakeholders could be anywhere in the world right now, just on the other side of TikTok potentially, and that can have huge consequences. So I do think, you know, that kind of criticality from us as consumers is also one of the best individual actions that will push businesses. If we demand better, they will give better, because you know, supply and demand is what keeps the world turning.
Absolutely. And also people are nosy, right? So and I think social media's really helped with that. And I say this to almost every business. People are nosy, they want to know what's happening. So they want to know what you're up to, like what happens behind the scenes, what progress are you making, what are your plans, all that kind of stuff. They're really nosy, they want to know that information. So again, it's and it comes back to your side really with the evidence and the data to prove that for sure. And so when you talk about people, obviously you mentioned kind of like people as one of the triple bottom line categories. Do you mean people in business, as in within the business, or are you talking about stakeholders as a wider?
I think all, and again, that's where businesses often don't really consider it. Like the people are the people who work in your company every day, but they're also your future workforce. You know, we want to employ people. How are we going to get people to even walk through our door if they don't trust our organization? It's your customers, and then your customers' friends and families and contacts and everybody that they could possibly know. It's your neighbors, the people who live next door to you, and how they go and talk about you as a business. I think businesses fall into, you know, almost a naivety around, well, our employees are the only people that matter, and they matter probably the most because they are the ones who will affect change. But we're all complicated individuals, you know, with our own thoughts, beliefs, and opinions. And I think businesses would be remiss. And I think this is probably what taps into, you know, authentic leadership, really. It's like, if you don't walk the walk, people figure that out really quickly. And although they might turn up and do the job that's being asked of them, you know, to get their pay at the end of the month, do they go home and tell their friends how awful you are? Because
how rubbish their job is and everything else, and how badly they're treated or whatever. Absolutely. And I think, you know, well, 5-6 years ago, when we were allowed to work from home a lot of the time and all this hybrid working started, all that kind of stuff, I think that's even more prevalent than ever now, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So it is a case of, definitely the people in your business are absolutely critical, clearly, because they keep the cogs working, but it's that impression that you give even when they go home. And also I think, and I'm sure again you see this, you know, businesses that implement more sustainable business practices or responsible business practices, that then follows their employees home as well.
Absolutely.
So they go home and turn the lights off rather than leaving them on all night as well. It's
and then when they start advertising for jobs, what they get is the best and the brightest who are motivated to support, you know, the positive progress.
Exactly, which is exactly what it should do. So those businesses communicating sustainability or responsibility, how do they do that without overclaiming then? Is that to do with the data and the evidence that you would help them with?
And I think actually that's a really good way of thinking about greenwashing. Greenwashing is essentially overclaiming. You know, it is saying like, oh, because we planted these trees, we're now fully sustainable. Like that's too big a chasm. You know, you can say we did these great things. This is what's working for us. This is what's not working for us. This is what we're going to do next. And I think that is the communication that, you know, we're asking leaders to demonstrate. Tell us what's good. Just tell us the truth. Like, we're all more aware, more enlightened now. We have better access to information.
And I think even for kids as well, you know, whether, well, I don't know what kind of age they would start. I mean, mine are 17 and 19 now, so they're a bit older, but they're really savvy. Like although my son's still an advocate for whatever Google says is right, which is a bit like, well, not always, or what TikTok says is always right, which is not always, but but they are really savvy and they will go and have a little delve elsewhere. And thankfully my daughter's making some very different choices on her shopping, for example, her clothes shopping than she used to because of exactly that information.
Exactly that.
And deciding actually that doesn't sit very well, which I'm quite relieved about because, I've worked hard on trying to persuade her.
Absolutely.
So it's a tough one. So, and you're a massive advocate for women in STEM as well. So, and leadership, I guess, as well. So where do you see that sits now versus maybe 10, 15 years ago when you kind of came into the industry? And what do you see that still needs to happen?
I mean, I think all of this complexity, and this is what I find really interesting about the sustainability conversation, is that again, if we think about people, just modern world, the complexities around equality, diversity, inclusion, poverty, education gaps, skills gaps, like all of these very complex issues are ultimately interconnected. And kind of solving one of them will have positive, because if you empower and educate people, then they go and get good jobs, and then they can do more for the environment, and then they can do more for the economy, and they pay more taxes. So which is why I like the Sustainable Development Goals to try and make sense of how interconnected all of these things are. I think what's important for me, and kind of always has been in my career, and also again where I recognize how lucky I am, I was never told I couldn't do anything or couldn't be anything. I was never told, I mean, some subtle messaging as a child, this is what boys do, this is what girls do, but I was never told, well, you couldn't be an engineer because you're a girl. It's just, and when I said this is what I want to do, my family were like, cool, crack on, off you go. Again, when I started in my career, and it still happens, it's not uncommon that I will walk into a business and have a room of men. And it's just me. But again, those are the sectors I've chosen to work in. I've chosen intentionally manufacturing, construction, offshore energy and waste, because those are the sectors I believe are critical to sustainable development. We need those. So for me, understanding that I'm still to a degree in the minority, that visibility is really important for next generations. I believe I have a right to be there. I have had wonderful working relationships. Thankfully, I've never been subject to anything, extremely bad or extremely uncomfortable. There's always comments. But ultimately, I've been able to do the job I need to do. I've never stood in a room being like, oh, they're not taking me seriously. But I bring my knowledge. I am good at what I do. Gender aside, the support that I offer to businesses is important. And I'm lucky to have a solid education to be able to progress that. But I think the old adage that no one actually ever told me I could grow up to be like this, because it wasn't a career path that existed when I was in school. And I think jobs of the future, we still don't have a clue as to what half of those are going to be. Those jobs and businesses are going to come to solve problems we're facing right now. So I just think it's showing girls and boys from a young age that there are careers in sustainability. I do believe science or scientific thinking is an important element of that. It's that ability to critically evaluate data and make informed, evidence-based decisions. But just to say, there are opportunities.
No barriers. And like you said, when you were younger and you wanted to be a marine biologist, but obviously, and there still are requirements from an education point of view as to what subjects you need to excel at, actually, because it's a difficult industry to get into.
It is.
But you found a way to get into that, again, this whole squiggly career thing, and it doesn't have to be. And I'm having these chats with not necessarily my daughter, who's the elder, but my son on the whole. If you jump into a job now, that doesn't mean it's your job for life.
No.
you know, and that is what's the most amazing thing I think about industry now, is that you can change, and there's so many facets to different jobs.
Absolutely.
Where I think, you know, when I left uni and went into corporate, there was like, you were assigned a marketing job, but that covered all marketing elements, not just, you know, kind
now
of
the
MPD
specialisms.
or all the specialisms there are now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's great, because then you can like really focus down on one thing. So yeah, I think, although there's maybe some overwhelm of the amount of choice now, I think, yeah, it's definitely, and I think people like yourself who can stand on a platform and just help children realize that, you know, like you say, it doesn't matter, irrelevant to their gender, you know, just say that this career is open to anybody. You just need to want to do it enough.
Of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I can still very vividly remember getting my A-level results and being like, my life is over, you know, that's it. There's nowhere to go here. Like, I'm going to be a failure forever. I'm never going to succeed. No one will ever hire me. And I think it's so unfair and so hard that kids still believe their whole life is determined at GCSEs, because it's so not the truth. Unfortunately, I remember growing up saying this to me at that age, being like, just wait, like life will unfold. And in hindsight, where I am now, like, I'm so grateful my career was squiggly. Like, I worked, you know, in research, I worked in agriculture, I worked in conservation, I've worked in customer service, I've worked in hospitality, you know, and all of those jobs taught me something that is really, really useful for what I do today. So actually, would I be as good at what I do today if I hadn't tried and failed at so many things along the way?
And that's a message to your younger self in its own, isn't it? On its own. Yeah, absolutely. I quite agree with that. Very briefly, you mentioned about the UN Sustainable Goals, or Sustainable Development Goals, sorry, a few minutes ago. Just, do you use that? I tend to point businesses to them because I think they're a much more digestible way of understanding where you can make progress, or where you identify where you already are making progress, and where elsewhere else you can.
Absolutely.
Do you use the same as well?
I
do you
do,
incorporate that
I
as well?
do.
It's not just scientific and data.
It ticks a lot of boxes. So it gives you the KPIs of the science and the data as to why this intervention is the right way to go. It tracks against the whole world. I always talk about the SDGs as like 17 of the world's biggest problems that need to be solved for us to hit that destination of sustainability. Incidentally, from a careers perspective, 17 potential career paths, and every single one of those has thousands of elements underneath it. So for kids today, I'd say, like, just find something in there that's interesting.
Find an area that interests you, and look behind it, because, like you say,
probably find a career.
Oh my goodness, I was like absolutely gobsmacked when I realised that. I was like, oh my goodness.
But I think, you know, the SDGs, this is like the third iteration. You know, it used to be the Millennium Development Goals. Like, we've been talking about this for, again, since the 60s and 70s. It's the current framework, and it's the one that's been the most robust and kind of the longest time. We're falling short on the targets, which is sad, but we're also making progress in some areas.
It's still moving forward, right? So that's got to be something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. So just final, well, actually 2 more questions. But if every business leader that's listening or watching today committed to one different thing tomorrow, what do you think they should be doing?
I think a little bit of a resource efficiency valuation. See what you can cut out. Specifically in terms of natural resources. Do you need to be buying all the things that you're buying? Because you're probably paying for them twice. You're paying to buy them, and then you're paying to throw them away. So what can you do better in that journey?
Excellent. I love that. And then the final question, a book recommendation. So I ask all my guests for a book recommendation, fact or fiction. It can be exactly whatever you think somebody might be interested in reading or listening to.
I think probably kind of where we started in this conversation. So thinking about the fallibility of humanity, you know, in the context of sustainability. One of the books that made the biggest impact on me is a book called Collapse by a guy called Jared Diamond. And essentially it's an evaluation of all of the civilizations that used to exist that don't anymore, and what the triple bottom line factors were that ultimately led to their downfall. So it's a bit dark.
And is there a common thread that you can see?
It ultimately always comes down to environmental degradation.
Oh my goodness.
You know, the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Romans, like everything we know in history, you know, almost every war is ultimately a war over natural resources. So it's a very interesting perspective.
A crystal ball, really.
Yes. Sorry.
And when was it written? Is it?
It's about 30 years old. It was
So
recommended to me when I did my undergrad degree.
Okay, right.
It was very formative.
Right. Well, I do normally end up kind of buying the book, so I will look for that one. But obviously, it'll go in the notes for the podcast anyway. But Tamma, it's been so lovely to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed
that. Where can people find you?
I am on LinkedIn. So I'm quite easy to find. Tamma Carel. I believe I'm the only one on LinkedIn.
I would imagine you probably are.
And then, yes, through that, feel free to contact us. Otherwise, you can check out the businesses Imvelo, IMVELO, and ICOR Systems. And we're based at the Toffee Factory in Newcastle.
Which we're in today.
Which is
an amazing building if you haven't been. Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Jo, thank you very much. I've enjoyed that.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening or watching the Responsible Marketing Podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast from. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe there too. I also love to get reviews as they make a huge difference to others discovering the show. So please leave a review, any comments or questions on whichever platform you prefer. And of course, feel free to share out your socials with your friends and your colleagues. If you want to contact me direct, you can email jo@jolongconsulting.com or find me on LinkedIn under my own name, Jo Long. Until next time, thanks for listening and for watching.